Hi, folks. This is Dr. Rob Cywes. I am the Carb Addiction Doc, and today I've got the honor and privilege. And as I think about the best way to describe this person that's on right now, I'm just going to use a simple phrase. I've got a good friend by the name of Doug, who you see sitting there, who has just written a book. And Doug Reynolds and I are going to chat today about a variety of different aspects. We've got some synergy, some differences of opinion. But Doug has written a book that I've had the fortune of looking through. It's called The Road to Metabolic Health, and it's both a life story as well as a dream of how to improve the metabolic health of the world where we've gone sideways. Doug, welcome. It's so good to have you here. And I think the best description for you is just friend.
I would totally agree with that, Rob. Thank you.
The first most topical question for you, and just before we came on, first of all, you were born in Borneo, which most people
No,
can't find it on the map. Is that
no, no,
correct?
no, no, no. My dad was born in
Oh,
Borneo.
your dad was born in
My
Borneo.
dad was born in Borneo, and I was born in Rhodesia
Okay, so you
many
were
years
born in
later.
Rhodesia because yeah, I
Yeah.
read that Borneo thing, and that was an interesting backstory. But here's the interesting thing, and it's particularly pertinent with somebody else that is from our part of the world, a guy by the name of Elon Musk, who has a huge footprint on the world right now, like it
Mm,
or dislike it. And then if you look at the prominence of a very tiny spick of a country at the bottom of Africa, third world country, that has such dominance in the metabolic health space, from Tim Noakes to yourself, there are so many South Africans and Southern African people that are involved in this metabolic transformation. Do you
mm.
have, I'm sure you've thought of it, do you have any ideas, any thoughts as to what in our background originating from Southern Africa, what in our background, what in our upbringing, what in our education makes us so impressive as a subspecies in terms of innovation, in terms of changing aspects of how the world sees certain things and does certain things.
Yeah, I kind of talk about that in the book, because and that was when I first wanted to write a book. It was going to be about all these things that happened to me in my life that positioned me to make that decision the day I put the phone down after talking with Gary Taubes and looked at Pam and said, we got to do this. And there was so many things in my life that made me the person that I was, that to make that decision. And I go through, the book goes through, the first chapter is the early years, and that was growing up in Rhodesia, which is now Zimbabwe. And I try to identify um, the things that I experienced that are unusual for most other people who didn't grow up there, and um, and identify how those things might have influenced me and developed my personality and character, I suppose. Um, you know, a lot of stuff about, in the end, when something comes up that I feel needs to be done, then whether or not it's dangerous or scary or risky doesn't occur to me. I literally sat down the next morning after I'd had this conversation with Pam that we talk about in the book, saying, like, we need to do something about this. And I just sat down. We had no money. I didn't know anybody in the space, and I, I thought I knew how to put on an event based on the previous job that had been working at, but I kind of allude to that as we go through it. Like, I actually didn't know what I was doing either. But I didn't consider any of that. I literally just sat down and started working out what I need to do this, contacting people who I didn't know because I'd never been to even a conference, a low carb conference. And I just started looking people up, and I just started doing it.
And let me just
Uh,
stop you for a second. When you and Gary talked, that was Gary Taubes is obviously a world-renowned author and a scientist, a scientific author in this space, and he's had an impact on so many of us. But when you and Gary first talked, what was it that resonated with you that said, "This is my life's calling. This is what I'm going to dedicate myself to"?
So there were two things. Basically, I had contacted him, and I was aware of how, what his time was worth to him. And we went backwards and forwards a little bit, like literally through his website. And he eventually asked to have a discussion with me. Um, and I often, when I'm introducing him onto the stage, I often say it was like I had asked to marry his daughter, and so it was like this inquisition. Um, but at the end of it, he said to me, okay, if you put this thing on, I'll come and speak. And that was like, okay, thanks very much. And I put the phone down, and I was on speaker, and Pam was like down the corridor. And I looked at her and I said, shit, like, we got to put a conference on, okay, you know? Um, so I wanted to do it. Contacting him was building up to that, seeing if he was interested in speaking. But that confidence in me, having spoken to me for like in this inquisition for an hour, I and he then felt he had faith in me that I could do this. Um, what meant a lot to me, I think, and I think that was a big trigger. And it literally was like, okay, like start building a website. We had no website, no social media presence, nothing. And then I tell the story in the book as well, and it's even on the cover, um, that the next guy whose email I opened once I went back to work had a quote from Winston Churchill about the fact that every person uh, is born for something in life, and if they accept that opportunity when it comes up, it defines them, and it is in the end their finest hour. Um, and I say that like at the time, it was more inspiration to go ahead and do this, but at that time, we were only planning to do one event. What it's turned into is 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 just massive. And I, looking back on it now, I say in the book, like um, it means so much more now. And I really do believe that it was my finest hour, making that decision at that moment when I put the phone down to do this.
And I think just coming back to the first question about what's unique about the South African upbringing, and it is still an on. I was just back in South Africa a couple of weeks ago. It's still an ongoing factory for innovation,
Mhm.
for people that are, and the phrase I'm trying to teach my son, be cautious, but be brave. Don't let caution stop you from doing.
Right.
Be analytical, be cautious, but brave. Because if there was anything that was going to stop you from doing this, it would have been everything.
Mm.
Everything was wrong, and yet or everything was a challenge, an uphill mountain. You were surrounded by mountains
Right.
of things to overcome, and yet you took that course. And I don't think that folks with other backgrounds are as capable of taking on these challenges and executing on them rather than complaining, rather than telling other people what's wrong. I look at the Elon Musk example. Instead of complaining about banking, he went out and created PayPal. Instead of complaining about the big three, the fossil fuel cars, he created Tesla.
Mm.
So that's the same kind of thing that you've done. You've said, look, here are all the issues, but here's what we're going to create. I'm not here to argue about what you're doing. Let's create this. Let me step back for a second. Prior to
Mm.
speaking to Gary,
Right.
there must have been some epiphany, some change in your own personal life that led to you changing your own personal eating pattern, your own metabolic
Mm.
health. Can you walk us through a change from what we call the standard American diet or a high carbohydrate diet that's been the narrative since the 1970s? What was the forerunner to you meeting with Gary in your own personal life?
Yeah, I've told this story so many times on podcasts and at the events and stuff. And um, Pam always says, "You always say the same thing." And I said, "Well, 'cause that's the story, I don't want to make it up." Um, but yeah, trying to summarize it, I basically got involved with a very impressive guy who, back in the day, used to fly or fly on, was part of the crew of Marine One, which is the helicopters that fly the president around. So he's a pretty impressive guy, and we were involved in a number of we got involved in MLMs and all sorts of stuff, but he was driving it all. And he sent me an email like saying like he had just started this exogenous ketone company. And the title of it is something like, the ketones a better source of fuel than glucose or something. And at that point, it was exactly the right time. My knees were sore. I put on like 35 pounds, what I used to call my fighting weight. And I was miserable. I thought I was just being lazy, and that was why I was putting on the weight, And um, this this thing came and said like there's an alternative to. I never even heard of a ketone. I So many people know what keto, or they think they know what ketoacidosis is and stuff, but they've heard it of some. I don't know why, but I literally had never even heard of a ketone, and so I started studying it, and I literally downed tools for 3 weeks. And by that stage, Low Carb Down Under had an event. I think the South African Tim Noakson had an event in South Africa, and there were some videos online on YouTube about that. And so I started listening to all of those videos. I read The Art and Science of Low Carbohydrate Performance and of Low Carbohydrate Living that Steve Finney and Jeff Follick wrote. Those are like the first two books I read. And literally all in that 3 weeks. And at the end of it, it just explained everything. As an engineer, it explained everything. And I was like, okay, Pam, we're going shopping. And, I'd kind of mentioned it here and there, but she had no clue what this was all about, really. And then we went and I started buying all of this stuff that I was even freaking out about. But then, ribeye steaks with all this fat on it and full cream yogurt and heavy whipping cream and all of these things around the outside of the food store. Don't go anywhere down the aisles where all the sugar and stuff is. Yeah, I took it home, had this steak, was literally had to gag it down because there was so much fat. But as I got through it, by the time I got halfway through, it was tasted brilliant. And I'd been eating cardboard up until then, take all the fat away from stuff. And so we did. But there was very little stuff online about keto, and we struggled. We hit plateaus, and it just for me, I was just trying to lose that weight so that I could run again. But in 6 months, the weight came off, my knees cleared up, my respiratory issues cleared up, all sorts of things that I wasn't even doing it for. He was come home from a 90-minute martial arts class the night before, and before I couldn't even get out of bed, and now I was jumping out of bed and going for a run. Loving running again, and that was when I was planning my first at my birthday dinner, once all the other people had left, saying like, how is it I didn't know about this? And like, we need to teach people like me who didn't know about this about it. And I'd heard, I'd obviously done some research with the books and everything. And so I said, there's these little conferences around. Why don't we lived in San Diego at the time, like Destination Summer, we need to put 1,000 people in the room. And I literally
Let me stop you there for a second, Doug,
Yeah.
because that is your personal introduction to that. But there's a backstory that a lot of people don't truly have. And first of all, when I look at you and I compare the issues that you were facing at the time that you desire to change to most of my patients are carb addicts, they're morbidly obese, they have diabetes, they have profound diseases where their relationship with sugar and starch is out of control. Primarily your relationship with sugar and starch originally was there because everybody was telling you that it made you run better. It was the consensus, and you were a victim of the narrative of the transformation in the 1970s to the recommendations, but you didn't have a personal addiction. However, you did have, and I hope we can touch on this a little bit if you're okay with it.
Mm.
You did have something that a lot of people don't have, you don't have the addiction. At most, you abused carbohydrates because you thought they were
because
beneficial.
I thought they were good for me.
Correct. But
Exactly.
you
Yeah.
do come from a background where you had a very serious head injury.
Mm,
And that is a health issue. A lot of people have brain issues, whether it's Alzheimer's, whether it is forms of cancer. We're hearing more and more about glioblastoma. We heard about CTE, the chronic traumatic encephalopathies, football players, that kind of thing that are getting that. Are you comfortable talking a little bit about whether or not your prior brain injury, what it was, what happened,
mm,
whether that influenced you getting into this, and whether there's been any, both by your own recognition or by Pam's, and we'll talk about Pam in a second because I got an important question there, but
mm,
have you seen any difference in terms of your brain recovery? And by the way, I have a number of vets, of military vets, that have had a variety of different brain injuries. I just saw
mm,
somebody last week that was involved in an Iraqi brain explosion, the one that said, "Oh, you'll get over your headache." Well, they've got a serious brain injury and they've taken down this pathway. Give
mm.
us your personal story, your personal experience, if you're comfortable talking about it.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to, and I talk about it in the book as well. You know, um I had a motor vehicle accident. We got T-boned in my door, and um I got a broken collarbone and dislocated ribs and a vertebra that's still out of place. Um, but the really bad thing was the brain injury. I literally couldn't see for 3 months, and I say in the book, and I've said to so many people, like I don't know how I didn't die. I literally have no idea. If you
And
look
this
at
was
the state I
before
was
you
in.
changed your diet.
Oh yes, this was like literally it was weird. It was like I was supposed to go and work in Klerksdorp on a gold mine there, which is about an hour outside of Joburg. And I got involved in doing triathlons, and there was a triathlon in Klerksdorp that weekend.
And these are all
And
towns in South Africa.
correct. It's a town just outside Johannesburg. And so we went to do the triathlon, and we were driving home back to Joburg on the Saturday. And I was then due to Monday to drive back there again to start work on the mines because I had a bursary from Anglo American, and I had to work off the 2 years that I owed them for paying for university. And we got T-boned, and I smacked my head. We think on that thing that comes out of where the seatbelt comes out on the side, but nobody really knows. And yeah, I couldn't feel anything. They did a lumbar puncture on me at one stage, and I didn't even feel it. I couldn't even feel the pressure on my skin. And the problem was that I had this compression fracture in my collarbone, but because I didn't feel any pain, I wouldn't keep it still. And I started moving around, and it started to come apart.
Mm.
And they the neurosurgeon wouldn't let me have an anesthetic to plate it because over the weeks it's just it got like half an inch apart, the two pieces, and they needed to plate it. And they would put me in like almost like a straitjacket. But because these were these two pieces now, it was almost like I could dislocate my shoulder, right? But these pointy bits of the thing would like point through my skin, and the blood would start trickling down here, and I would like get myself out of the straitjacket, and I just wouldn't keep it still because I couldn't feel anything.
Right.
And I was pretty obtuse at that stage, I think, as well. And I just yeah. So eventually, and I could see if I looked out of one eye, but if I couldn't focus, and I'd say, well, people hated talking to me because they said it was like talking to a chameleon, like my eyes would move independently of each other. And I thought they were bullshitting me, but I've looked it up recently, and it actually is a real thing
Mhm.
that
And do you
happens.
think that your change in diet has had, to what extent
Huge,
is your
huge
head
effect.
injury a factor in your change in diet? And what impact have you noticed, if any?
Yeah, so um, I didn't start doing this. It was like my knees clearing up. That was like a side effect of trying to lose weight by going on this diet, right? And what were we talking about there?
The impact of the dietary change in your
Yeah,
injury.
right. So my biggest my biggest problem with this brain injury was like exactly what happened now. There's two things. First of all, I forget what I'm talking about like really, really easily. And sometimes if I'm reminded, I can get back to it and sometimes not. Um, and um, finding words, like simple words that I know are in my vocabulary, but while I don't speak fluently, and I don't, I write pretty well because I can sit and think about it, but speaking is hard for me. I really struggle and um, I get stuck. And sometimes I can't think of the word. And I literally have to try and explain what the word means so that I can explain to people what I'm trying to say. Um, and because of that, I was very afraid of speaking in public and stuff because I was terrified that one of these two things was going to happen to me all the time. And um, I remember Georgia Eid, the first time she came and spoke in West Palm Beach, having a chat with her, telling her all about my problems, when we were at dinner or something. And she said to me that, and mental health is the benefits of the keto diet for mental health has just exploded now, but back then not so much. But she said to me she was finding with her patients that um, the anxiety was very much reduced. And so it made me think back to the very first event where one of the things I needed to do was find an MC because there was no way I was getting on that stage. But as it got closer and I never found the right person, it was like, you know what? I think I can do this. I wasn't afraid anymore. And I wasn't anxious anymore. And the thing is that the more anxious you are, the more this happens to you. It's like feeds on itself. So when the anxiety went away, I actually got through the first two or three events without going blank. And the weirdest thing was in San Diego, I was introducing Georgia Eid when it happened to me for the very first time.
Interesting.
And I had something I wanted to say about a little anecdote or something, and I just lost it. And eventually I just ran off the stage and I said, "Oh, Georgia, don't you want to just come up and." And when I got up on the stage afterwards, I told everybody like, sorry about that, and I told them for the first time, nobody even knew about it other than some close friends. And so I think the thing with it, and I talked about it at the following Boca, was that there's two things. First of all, I'm not so afraid anymore. Plus, the keto community, for some reason, because of all of this stuff where they're more relaxed and all of that, they're just I know it's generalizing, but they're a much nicer crowd in general,
Hmm.
somehow.
I
And
would agree with that.
I talk about it in the book as well. Like I've never been able to really put our finger on why.
Yeah, there's a degree
But
of
so for those
excitement,
two
a
reasons,
degree
I
of
wasn't
pleasure.
afraid.
Yeah.
And it was like I got on the stage, I forgot what I was saying, and it was okay. I didn't die. And I without adopting this and having those changes happen, I would never have been on that stage in the first place. Um, and I'm not 100% fixed, but I I'm so much better than I used to be. And if it does happen, I'm not afraid of it anymore. And
Exactly.
so,
I think that's such an important thing because there are a number of people. You've covered two topics that you've kind of linked together: the anxiety, the depression, the mental health side, and then the cognitive impairment issue, which some people get from a traumatic injury, some people get from progressive brain damage, such as Alzheimer's or Parkinson's. So
mm,
that is a great synergy synopsis there. Something I just want to circle back to, you mentioned quite a few times, you've mentioned somebody by the name of Pam. And I know exactly who she is. Pam's your
yeah.
wife and support system. But one of the things I want to just focus on and bring to the fore, because this is a struggle for a lot of our patients. And when you first started to change your diet, how did she approach it? What kind of support or antagonism did she offer? And how much do you currently depend on her in terms of dietary support, in terms of having a home that represents the way you eat?
Yeah, I mean, she's totally into it now. And obviously having both of us believe in it as much as we do, it's a no-brainer. It's brilliant. But in the beginning, like I said, I mean, I'd mentioned, like, I'm reading this stuff, it's amazing, this, and sort of mentioned it, but hadn't really had these big discussions with her about the benefits or the possible benefits of what I was learning about. Um, and I just so it was like dragged her to the store, and she said, "Wait, what? You're going shopping and you've got a list? Like something's not right?" Um, and then she started seeing what I was putting in the shopping cart, and then she was freaking out. And then she said, like, where am I going to get all my vitamins and stuff? Um, I'm no bread and pasta and all of that stuff. Where am I going to get all my vitamins? And I was starting to try and explain to her what I had learned about it, and that it's not bioavailable there anyway. It's added, and in meat and these other natural products, that it's available in spades and it's bioavailable, and so much more of it. And so it was like, oh, okay. But I think because I was so, and I suppose I do, as with anything, I get something in my head and it's like, okay, I'm going to do this. And then I think she knew to not get in my way. She was worried and concerned that she was going to be she was going to suffer malnutrition. Um, but she went along with it. But over the weeks now, we were throwing all of the stuff away, all the carby stuff out of our pantry and everything, and um, she was learning more and more about it. And I think starting to feel better as well. A bit of weight came off for her as well. She always is upset with me because I lost more than she did, but um, you know, uh, she's a woman, and she was going through menopause and stuff like that. And that's like a whole nother uh, can of worms. And so, but yeah, she's over a few weeks, a few months, really. She came on board completely,
And
and
she's
we've
also, I mean,
been.
she is a stalwart, often not given the recognition that she
Oh,
deserves in terms of the meetings, in terms of the setup, in terms of the background.
absolutely,
So
absolutely.
just want to really, because I've gotten to know and love Pam tremendously, and she's just out there doing her thing. And I think without Pam, none of this happens as well.
Yeah. So I mean, an example of that is this book. I mean, I was approached by Chris, who is the CEO of Game Changer Publishing, and their thing is they can produce a book in 90 days, but that is for a book that's not quite as involved as mine was. But I started it, and we worked out that 90 days was like basically a couple of days before Boca. And so I got it in my head that we should try and launch it for Boca. And if it wasn't for that, we wouldn't have been 90 days, because we would have taken longer to get some of that stuff done. But I remember when I eventually pulled the trigger and said, okay, we're going to do this, and I engaged with them. I said to her, I promise you, I won't kill myself to get this thing out by Boca. Um, but she knew better. And the last 10 days, literally 15 hours a day, like trying to trying to make sure. Well, it was Sunday night, last night was the deadline,
Wow.
that we had to submit the manuscript, sign off on it for them to start the process to make it available by the time we get to Boca. And not only that, but, and I think I say in the acknowledgements that I ended up killing her too, because for the last 3 days, like, she's just been buried in trying to find all the, to basically edit it and try and help me find a lot of things. That she really helped with were me describing things about a scene or situation in South Africa or Rhodesia that was just, she didn't understand what I was talking about. and we had to reword these things so that it made sense to her, and that would mean that it would make sense to an American reading the book. Um, yeah, she helped
Yeah, she's
so
absolutely
much with
brilliant.
that
Now,
stuff.
you've alluded to the publishers, and as you're well aware, I've been on a 20, 30-year trajectory to get a book published that hasn't gone
Mm,
beyond the first chapter. And you've been very helpful way back in terms of helping you to start out, and I just haven't taken it there. And there are a lot of folks out there that would love to get their story published that and what you've done is a very unique approach with this
right.
company. Won't you explain to me how this works? Because my head is buzzing with the ease with not it's still a lot of hard work, but how much easier than it is to sit and write this or type it
Yeah.
or explain to me what the process was, how you connected, who these people are, give them a plug, but help out people who have thoughts and ideas they want to publish but can't pull the trigger like myself.
Yeah, so her name is Chris Corley, and she owns Game Changer Publishing. And we got connected on, and was still Twitter back then. And she sent me a message and said, like, you look like you're doing amazing stuff. Any thoughts on writing a book? And I had thoughts years ago already. You know, I've had a very unique upbringing. I've had all these experiences that led me up to a point where I needed to write. And I was only going to, initially, the book was going to be how everything led up to me making that decision when I spoke with Gary to go and do this. That was going to be the end of the book. Um, but most of the time, the publishers take a huge cut out of the commissions on the book ad infinitum, right? And their model is different. They basically charge a fee, which in the beginning I thought was a lot of money. So they charge $10,000. Um, and they basically they help you. So they put someone in touch with you. They get on Zoom, and the first thing is to hammer out the outline of the book. And this lady that was helping me, I think I mentioned to you before we were recording that she follows Dr. Berg. So it was so lucky for me that she understood all the terminology and stuff that we were talking about that made it so much easier. But when she said, no, like this book needs to be so much more than just your early days story, and you need to talk about what your organizations do now and the ketogenic diet in depth and like teach people about this stuff. And my whole intent was to get out of my bubble, my sphere of influence, and be able to reach people outside of there so that we could expose more people to our message and to what it is that we do. So she spent, I don't know, probably 5 or 7 hours or something work. She was only supposed to spend one, but she was so interested that we spent a lot of time just talking but ironing out the outline. And then I spent probably 9 hours with her over a few sessions, literally. So she would then be quiet, and I would start at the top of this outline, and she'd put all these points in for each chapter, and to remind us what issues we wanted to talk about and mention in each of these chapters. And so I literally just follow this down and start talking. And I think you would be brilliant because you just talk and you just go. I was struggling. It was hard for me because I was struggling because now I'm anxious about this as well. I kept forgetting what I was saying. I couldn't find words, and so my transcription is diabolical. Um, but at the end of it, they then do a manual transcription. They don't put it through a machine. They have someone that literally sits there and listens to the recordings
So
and
this is not
creates.
an AI transcription.
No, no, no. So they have a person that actually does it. And then they have this whole editing team that then creates the initial manuscript from that outline or from the transcriptions. And because of how bad my recordings were, I mean, there's only so much they could do, right? But then that's when the work started, and I started to then work with that and start correcting it where it was a bit wrong or whatever. And there was one chapter, the one when I'm talking about when I'm in the army, that my dictation was so bad that I literally ended up retyping the whole thing. But it's only 5 or 6 pages in the context of the whole book, and so it wasn't too much of a heartache. But at the end of it, I had this manuscript, and yes, in order to get it done in time to get it to the publishers in time for Boca, I killed myself. But if that hadn't been the case, if I hadn't been set myself that deadline, it wouldn't have been 15 hours a day. It would have been whatever time I had. But I told you, I think years ago, I sat down because I knew I had this book in me, right? Or I thought I had this book in me, and I had the first sentence, and that I've actually found it the other day, and it was a Word file with one sentence in it, and I didn't get any further. And so it's hard to sit
Oh, hell
there
yes.
to work out the outline. By the time I'd finished working with her on that, I was like, oh my God, I had no idea what I should have been doing to try to create this outline. I kind of knew that I had a couple of ideas that there'd be chapters about this and this and this, but no real strenuous outline. And she was amazing. And then the editors, because normally what they do is that you do it, and then the editors get a look at it, and it comes back to you and whatever. But because we were up against this deadline, they were literally working in parallel with me. We had these ground rules about who could do what and what the comments we were working in a Google Doc. And if the comments were like this, then it was for me, and if it was like this, it was for the editors. And so we were working in parallel, and they were prepared to do that. I think like deviate from their normal protocols to try to help me to get this done in time.
And what I'm going to do is I will put in our show notes, I'll put a link to this company so that people can Google them and look them up and maybe contact them if they've got a book
Yeah,
in.
and tell them tell them that they where they to tell them where they got it from, and they'll give you a commission as well. So
Oh, good, 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 good.
you
So
need
now
that.
let's
Uh,
shake this up a little bit, Doug. May or may not be in the book, but you started out, the first venture for you is to create this low carb USA space. And those were conferences you put in. That's where I kind of got to know you, being
mhm,
having the fortune of being invited to speak there, and that's been such an incredibly good personal experience, and also a builder for me in the community. So I owe you a huge debt of gratitude for that. Tim Noakes tells, and he's obviously a very big mentor for me, and we're very close, but
mhm,
he tells a beautiful story about how he got together with a few other people in the world and created the science of sports medicine, and created sports medicine as a specialty organization. It took a long time to foster.
mhm,
And Tim certainly spearheaded that and has spent most of his career, his life, developing sports science as a subspecialty of medicine. And in the latter part of his life, and he and I was at that conference in 2012, I think, or 2014 in South Africa, where he kind of got into the metabolic space. But we started talking at a very early stage about the importance of creating a society very similar to what Tim did for sports nutrition or sports science, to create a metabolic health space as a priority. We have the journal, we have the people, we have the science, we have the research, we have the group of practitioners, but everybody was functioning disparately. How do we bring that all under the same hat? So we began, I think Adele Height was the first meeting was in San Diego, where we started creating the framework for the Society of Metabolic Health Practitioners, SMHP. But you were Low Carb USA. And I think
mhm,
something that people have struggled with is the distinction and the synergy between Low Carb USA, because everybody had these little disparate conferences and groups. And I love the fact that you and Jeff have now created synergy, and Jeff has donated that the Low Carb Denver, Low Carb Breck
organization, yeah.
to the organization. You've got Low Carb Down Under that you alluded to. Help us to understand the administrative functions and how you wear two different hats, how you create that synergy, because I really want to clear up some of the conflict and some of the issues that surround this that people have come to me about. Can you delve into those two organizations?
I can try, yeah, because I try and do
Yeah.
it like I'm giving up on it, but I even got a couple of slides on in my opening talk where I'm literally, it's like this caricature wearing a hat and then like a change, and I'm saying, here's the SMHP, and I'm wearing a different hat. And so that was what I was always trying to explain, that they're two separate organizations, which they are. But the more I think about it, so the SMHP is this umbrella organization that you're talking about that provides practitioners with a place to be, that provides a way for patients who want to try and do this to learn for themselves and to try and find a practitioner in our database for someone that can help them. But and then we've got the accreditation process and all of that kind of stuff. It's all kind of really focused on the practitioner. And
I see SMHP as a specialty organization, as a fledgling growing. That's
right.
why I created this similarity with sports science.
Yeah.
It's in its early days, but it really is a specialty organization.
Yeah, for sure. And obviously, the more members we get, the more people that we get eyeballs on here, the better. And so that's one of the major purposes of the book. At the end, in my conclusion, I'm saying if this has resonated with you and it's something you want to learn more about, then scan here, and it takes you to a page on the SMHP site that we're still building. And but it's going to have all the resources on one page, basically all the things where people can go and learn more, join, find the guidelines, all those different things that they can find in one place. So I'm really excited about that, and hopeful that we do get out beyond the bubble and get more eyeballs on what we do.
And how do we separate low carb? What is the
so LowCarb USA? At the moment, what we're still doing is that they are primarily organizing these events, these symposiums. Okay, so we effectively put these symposiums on behalf of the SMHP now. Originally, it was just for us. And what's happening more and more is that, and so the SMHP is a 501c3. It's a nonprofit, right? LowCarb USA is not. We've never made any money, but it's not a nonprofit. It's actually a regular a corporation. And so there's certain things that you just can't do stuff in a nonprofit if it doesn't, or at least you can't do stuff that's tax-free if it doesn't match exactly with the stated mission of the organization. So that's why I think LowCarb USA is going to kind of stick around for quite a while and not just become one thing, because there are benefits to having a for-profit organization that can do stuff that the SMHP or the nonprofit can't do, at least without being taxed. And that would be terrible if we suddenly all start getting taxed because we did something that was against the rules. But I see it more and more from a functional standpoint that it is one thing, and that's why I've even taken it out of my next talk. I'm not even going to try and explain what the difference is, because we are becoming more and more. At least the two organizations are two different departments almost. If you had to think about a company, the company has a mission or a role, and there's different departments within that company that do different things to achieve the goal of the company itself. And that's kind of how it's existing right now. One day, I don't know, it might change, but right now it's actually working pretty well. So we're sticking with that.
How do you think going forward with SMHP, how do we build international consensus? Because there are, the UK's got its own group, Europe's got its group,
Yeah.
Australasia's got a group. The two questions really, and I'll follow up on them, but how do we create international globalization of this fledgling organization? How do we incorporate international members? And how do we bring together all of these disparate groups that all have their own, not so much mission agendas, but their own profit-making agendas?
Yeah. So that is kind of difficult, but um, our idea was to create these things called international chapters, right? And so the idea was to have a chapter with a commit, like, so we've got a bunch of committees. Now there's another thing in the committees list that's international chapters. And so you've got the chair and the other people that are on the board, and then their role is to create um, a page or a sub-site almost, depending on how much information there is, of stuff that is relevant to their country, and because we have different rules, NIH, what's it called, the in the UK,
PMA, the yeah.
no, their health regulation
Oh,
body. I've gone
yeah, I
blank
wouldn't
on it
know.
right now. But it's the way they work is completely different to here. NIH, is it?
NIH, right? No,
Yeah.
NIH is the US-based one. Oh,
So it's
NHS, National Health System.
NHS, man.
Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
NHS. Sorry, yeah.
Right. So but the way that works is very different to the way it works in the States. And the way they work in Canada is very different. And the way they work in Australia is very different. So the idea is to have information in there that is kind of country specific. And so if you're a Canadian, so that's the thing. Our very first um, international chapter is the Canadian one. So they've identified if you look on our site now, but so far all we've got is the committee. And then they're working on the page that we're going to then introduce onto the website. While I was back in the UK, we went and attended the PHC conference there, and there was a few really prominent people there that were very keen to do this as well. So we're almost at a stage now where I'm going to Campbell Murdoch is a guy that's probably going to chair that and run that. So I'm going to get him to start creating the UK or the British version of this, like a British chapter. We did have an Australian one, but they're more interested in still raising money to do events themselves and all that kind of things. And so there is a tie with us, and they get a discount. Their members get a discount if they want to join the international organization, the SMHP. But they're not sort of following that model. And so, we'll see how it goes. If it works well, maybe we do the other ones the same way. I don't know. Right now, it's not the way we think it should work, but it's, the jury's out. We need to see how it works. And because that's the thing, you can't be dogmatic about anything. You need to look at it and say, hey, these guys have actually got a good idea. And think just because it's not my idea doesn't mean it's not a good idea,
Right.
So that's the idea with trying to build out the international community. We have quite a few people actually that are just regular members of the SMHP who live all over the world. But we don't have a community for them in their country that can support them with the stuff that is specific to their country.
Right.
So,
So, Doug, just to switch tactic completely, let's return back to home base here in the US. As everybody is well aware, there's been a massive change in terms of the potential for governmental change in the healthcare space.
mhm.
And, you know, most of my career as a metabolic health practitioner, evolving metabolic health practitioner, I've been on the outside looking in, fighting a system, fighting an algorithm that is moving away from where I am while I've moved this way in my own personal practice.
Mm,
We've battled the US dietary guidelines, we've battled the USDA, we've battled the FDA, we've battled pharma, we've battled university doctrine that is often religion based rather than science based. And
mm.
outright, I will put it out there, just full of lies and distortions of metabolic reality. Um, and I mean, I see a large part of the healthcare space culminating in the Luigi event in New York. As horrible as that was for the human being, we are all at wit's end in terms of fighting the healthcare industry. And SMHP has been one of those cogs in the wheel trying to fight things. I think for the first time in my career as a physician, we are now at least seeing a glimmer of hope
Mm.
where we are going to hopefully right the ship. And I'm not talking politics, I'm really talking about healthcare. Yes, it's political, but I'm talking about the healthcare side. Um, how do you see, what is your dream? How do you see SMHP playing a role? Does it play a role? Do our members play a role? How do you see the next 4 years unfolding in terms of gaining traction for our movement for what we talk about in metabolic health?
Yeah, I think what's his name? Kennedy, right? Uh, so it seems like he's really open to at least listening. He says some of the right words and stuff, and he's sounds like he's definitely open to exploring this and seeing whether we actually have a message that makes sense or not, and incorporating that into mainstream eventually, hopefully. Um, Kind of anybody who has an opportunity as an in there somewhere is needs to work on that now, because it's something that's actually probably worth the effort. Gurpreet Pada, Dr. Gurpreet Pada, who's spoken at quite a few of our events, and he's speaking in Boca next month as well. He's an incredible businessman as well. And he's like, I'm an Indian, like I'm a businessman, before I'm a doctor. And he's just done some amazing things, building hospitals, and he's this whole coaching program that he's done and everything. But he was chatting to me the other day, and he um, has some political connections, and um, he knows Kennedy, and he's literally trying to arrange an audience for us with him in order to see how we can, where this discussion goes. So, until it happens, it hasn't happened, but I'm hopeful. And if it's not us, if the minute it starts to actually move, if somebody has enough influence to get it to start to move the needle, then we need to get involved, because that is your vision for this and my vision for this as well. Is like this, and Gurpreet was saying the same thing. He sees this as the organization that represents this protocol in society, not just in America. And we need to be front and center driving the narrative. And whatever we can do uh, to do that, we need to do. And so we launched a brand new website for the SMHP and for Low Carb USA in this last year. We did an extra event that we don't normally do, and I wrote a book. So this year was chaos, but it's after the book launch, it's like um, I'm not going to commit to a bunch of other things anymore, and maybe that's something I need to do the whole year next year is see um, once the new administration's in place, like what we can do, how we can make inroads. Anybody
Yeah, I
that's
mean,
got
I
anybody that's
personally,
got ideas, they need to let us know.
yeah. I mean, I sit on the board of SMHP from the founding and am very heavily vested intellectually in the direction. But I see two huge benefits. First of all, instead of having single people represent our space at that level. Yes, the people open the door to the introduction, but
Mm.
now you've got a science-based organization that has evidence, that has publishing capacity, that has a membership. So it's not just a single person blah blah blahing. You've got a consensus voice that
Yeah.
that has the opportunity to become louder. So I really would like to see SMHP take a leading role in communication at the governmental level. And yes, you can put individuals on committees and things like that, but I think the Diabetes Association needs to be changed, ADA, the US Dietary Guidelines, USD, Department of Agriculture. All of there's room to improve a variety of things there. But the
Mm.
second thing, and as I talk to a lot of academicians and people who've got aspirations of moving up in academic spheres and even economically, they did not want to brand themselves with SMHP because it was too easy a target when SMHP was on the outside looking in.
Mm.
And I think in terms of growing consensus, growing our membership, when people feel more comfortable expressing this as being the right way to go, then I think that our membership and our voice is going to grow synergistically. So if there's anything I'd like to see with SMHP, is really normalizing what we talk about rather than being branded as some fringe crackpot
Mm.
organization, which is the best leverage they have against us is to use labels, political labels that are far from the truth
Mm.
because their truth doesn't match the truth. So the two things I would love for us to become more mainstream in terms of how we affect the government agenda and displace the narrative of religious organizations and fringe organizations and plant-based agendas. But secondly, allow our membership to grow both nationally and internationally because people are desiring to be aligned and they see it as a badge of honor to be aligned with
Mm.
us rather than being told, well, you know what, we like your work, but you're part of the SMHP. We don't want that at our university. Does that make sense? And
Yeah.
I think that this book comes at such a good time because, as you've said, within our bubble, there's deep consensus
Mm.
about our mission.
Yeah.
But the problem is there's this massive conflict with the rest of the world because of the narrative of these organizations priorly at a governmental level. I'd love to see that transform and our membership grow because people desire to wear that badge on their shirt and say, I am this person. One of my jackets, one of my coat jackets has a little blue badge on it, which says citizen scientist. I got that from Dave Feldman. And Dave has been one of those guys that's bucked the trend, has done some studies, but
Yeah.
I wear that badge proudly, not just in support of Dave, but because that really represents what we're doing is
Mm.
we are being citizen scientists against this government propaganda noise. And I'd love to see us make those inroads over the next 4 years. There's going to be conflict, there's going to be disappointment, but I think that the health of this country and the future of this country, particularly because of our pediatric health, depends on these changes happening.
Yeah, I agree totally. That, yeah, I mean, that's since we first started, well, we put the board together and we've been talking about what was going to go on the website and what accreditation was going to look like and that stuff. And you were always, even back then, harping on the fact that this is what we really need to be. That's where we want to get to, because then we've arrived, I think.
I agree, and I think this book that you're publishing is going to be beyond the bubble, and I really like that tremendously, both personally as well as from a hey, it's okay to be this person.
Mm.
Again, too many people are trapped in the. When I talk to my son, Rian, who's 4 years old, it's be cautious but brave. Too many people are overly cautious and they're not able to be brave and take that first step. I'm hoping that this book, together with other things that happen over the next few years, allow people that are trapped in caution to be brave enough to take that first step, like you did after the conversation with Gary. That was a big, brave step. And look where it's ended up, or not ended up, but look at the transition that you've made. It's not
Look
ended,
what's
it's just
happened. Yeah.
beginning. And I think that for me is such an important component. So Where can people, I know the book has just been finalized. What is your publication? How can people access the book? We'll have
Okay,
this in our show notes as well, but what is your launch date? How does all of that work?
all right. So it's all going to be through Amazon.
I love the
But
cover picture, by the way. That
but
is that is in my heart because that's where I come from.
yeah, I mean it just like I was telling you when we were off air, it was like I was looking for days trying to find a suitable picture that showed I wanted to show this rough road that ended up when there's a sunshine in the distance, you know, that depicted good health and hope. And and then just one day I came across this picture and that was it. It was like this is it. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's a picture of optimism,
yeah,
and I just apps of the dawn of a new optimism, and it's just it's an incredible. It evoked a lot of emotion in me, and it's a beauty. You couldn't have selected a better cover.
good. I'm
Um,
glad because I mean
but it's going to be
that's the other thing,
available.
you know. I've done so many things in my life where I thought it was a good idea and no one else did, and it was a big fail. Um, but, but the SMHP and Low Carb USA, the same thing. When I launched those things, it was like I had no idea if it was even what was gonna if it was gonna work or anybody would come, and they did. And so yeah,
And you see that brings us full circle because the first question I asked you at the beginning of this is what defines South Africans as being such thought leaders in the world in a variety of different spheres? And it's the ability to try and not be afraid of failure. And that's what you've done. You've tried, and things have worked out, things haven't worked out. But
yeah.
um, that for me is something that defines what we do is a call to action and then taking action in a stepwise way rather than sitting by and complaining about a whole bunch of things without taking action.
Yeah.
And every one of the prominent South Africans generally out there have done that, from Nelson Mandela through to Elon Musk. That's what we've done is we've broken barriers, we've done crazy things. And yet they've worked out.
Mm.
And they've worked out not because to fame and fortune for us, but for the benefit of the people that we deal with, for the benefit of the people. That's what people don't understand about South Africans is that, we are not just purely in it for the money. The thinkers, the people that move stuff forward, the profit margin is not what drives us. What drives us is the impact on the people around us, the benefit, the dream of creating a new pathway. And that's what you've done. As you've said, it's if this was about money, it would never have been a success.
Well, if it was about money, then it was another big fail in my life.
Exactly, exactly. And the same with me. I've made huge fiscal sacrifices to do what we do.
Mm,
Now, Elon has benefited from money, but everybody that says Elon's making money, he doesn't. This is a guy who sleeps on other people's couches. The money is a vehicle to building more. It isn't for self-aggrandizement. And
mm.
that's what people don't understand. You can't hurt someone with fiscal challenges because it's not about the money primarily. It's about building and realizing the dream. And that's what you've done with this. And it's quite incredible. And this is just the beginning.
Yeah, and I'm literally feel like there's another book in here, part two, because if I look back over it's been almost 10 years, which is pretty amazing. But if I look back at what has evolved in 10 years, it's beyond belief. And if the next 10 years are like that, then there's another story to be told from here onwards.
The next four.
Next 4 years. Okay, there we go.
That's what I'm very optimistic about.
Wow.
See.
Okay. Yeah.
But
Good.
Doug, thank you so much for this and congratulations on an incredible book. It's going to be available at Boca. I would encourage everybody to sign up for that virtually or come
Yeah.
down to
So,
Boca. I'm going to be speaking there, but this
but
is an
yeah, I mean, yeah, come to Boca because that's going to be the book launch basically. Um,
Boca is the beginning of 2025. And
You're right.
I look at this year's or next year, beginning of January of 2025's Boca, the Low Carb USA symposium as being the beginning of the new adventure on the inside rather than the outside looking in. There couldn't be a better time to release a book called The Road to Metabolic Health by Doug Reynolds. Doug, thanks so much.
Hey, man. Pleasure.
All right, man.
We'll see you next month.
Yes.